Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Samurai Goddess. The goddess next door takes on kung fu killers in this action-packed martial arts Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Samurai Goddess in paperback and e-readers today. I was reading an article online at the library yesterday which said that the comic book industry is on the verge of collapse and that DC Comics has a plan to save the comic book industry. And as I read that article, it upset me because it shows me how disingenuous people at DC Comics truly are. Because your Dan Didos, your Jim Lees, and your Bob Harrises orchestrated the decline of DC Comics. And here they are sitting here talking about how they're going to save the comic book industry. How does the person who created the dysfunction at their own company have the audacity to come out and say they're going to save the industry? Your products right now are the reason why the industry is in the state that it's in. And for you to say that you're going to come in here and fix the problems in the industry, that's disingenuous and that's dishonest. Because I can look at the history of DC Comics since Dan Dido took charge in 2002, and I can clearly see a decline in that brand under his leadership. Under his leadership, many comic book fans wound up walking away from DC Comics because he had things like kill lists for Infinite Crisis, and he killed off many popular characters that were fan favorites like Blue Beetle and Superboy, and that left a sour taste in people's mouths. Moreover, he approved the title that led to the decline, this event called Identity Crisis, a series where a character, Sue Dibney, who was a fan favorite, was sexually assaulted by Dr. Light, and that left a sour taste in people's mouths. But this is the individual who says that they have a plan to fix the comic book industry. The same individuals who created the event known as the New 52 and told longtime readers that their universe that they were used to was gone without giving people a proper send-off or letting people have a period at the end of the story of the post-crisis DC universe. This is the guy who says he has a plan to save the comic book industry, because after the New 52 came out, DC Comics sales went from a quick spike in sales all the way to a slump that they have never recovered from. Some people say Rebirth has brought sales up, but that's a short-term thing, and it hasn't really come back up to the pre-Dan Dido era level numbers where comics were selling 100,000 to 150,000 issues a month. When we look at Rebirth comic issues numbers versus the pre-Dan Dido era numbers, the numbers just don't compare. So we have this individual saying that they're going to save the comic book industry when how can you save something that you destroyed? How can you fix something that you broke? And when I look at the comic book industry overall and the big picture, it's clear to me that everyone at the top at Marvel and DC just needs to be fired. From your Dan Dido to your Jim Lee to your Bob Harris to your Diane Nelson at DC, and then over at Marvel, Axel Alonso and Alan Beverett, they both need to be given their walking papers, along with all the young social justice warrior editors at Marvel and the social justice warrior writers. Everyone just needs to be terminated, and both companies need to have their houses completely cleaned, because these publishing houses, both of them, are completely dysfunctional, and it's their mismanagement that is leading to the comic book industry being in a slump. And the industry is having trouble getting readers in the middle of this movie boom, because both of these companies have editors at the top with no vision for where they want to go, no direction for where they want to take their publishing houses in, and no plan to reach the new readers of the millennial generation and Generation Y. And because they have no vision, no plan, and no direction, that's why we're getting comics that do not look anything like the movies at Marvel Studios over at Marvel Comics, and we're getting comics that look nothing like the characters that everyone grew up with at DC Comics. Because when it comes down to comic book publishing, yes, you want to get the readers, but the whole thing is these editors do not know how to execute on concept to get readers. When I looked at Batman in 1989 as a kid, and I went to the comic book store to get a Batman comic, I could pretty much see Batman from the movie. I knew Batman from the movie wasn't the same as the comics, but the Batman in the comics looked like the Batman I grew up with on TV shows like Super Friends and the Superpowers show. So there was some way I could recognize that character. These days, when I go into a comic book store or I look at comics online, the characters look absolutely nothing like the characters on the screen or have any resemblance to them in any way, shape, or form. And for example, when you go to a Marvel Studios movie and you watch the movie, you go to the comic book store. A lot of young kids are going to the comic book store and they're going to look for the characters. They can't find the characters. Over when they just had a Spider-Man movie, and it's hard for people to find Peter Parker, the Spider-Man that was in the movie, because we have so many different Spider-Mans. We have Peter Parker, we have Miles Morales, and that's confusing to a new customer. And when it comes down to Iron Man, the most popular character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you have Riri Williams as the central character in the Iron Man comics. And you're sitting there wondering, why can't you get sales? The reason why you can't get sales is because of your poor approach to business and no plan to target new customers. If you've got a movie coming out, you would think you would have the character be in some standard way so that viewers can go from the movie theater to the comic book store to pick up the product. But no one at DC or Marvel understands this basic concept that helped me find Batman comics in 1988 and 1989 when that movie was released. And when I was younger, about 10 years old, helped me find Superman comics when Superman 3 was coming out. Because as I saw Christopher Reeve on screen, I could go to a grocery store and then find a comic book with Superman that looked just like he did in the movie. This is something that when you do go out today, you go see a movie, the character looks absolutely nothing like that character on screen. And in some cases, the secret identity of that character is completely different than what you saw on screen. And this is why, one of the reasons why the comic book industry is having a hard time reaching the new readers of the millennial generation and Generation Y, and why comics are having a hard time selling during one of the most popular periods in the history of the medium. I mean, comic book characters are making billions of dollars at the movies, but they can't even sell 17,000 comic books at the comic book store. And then for you to have a guy like Dan Dido and Jim Lee talking about, oh, there's a problem and we have a plan to fix it, that's disingenuous. That's just dishonest, because you guys created the problems with these characters that are leading to them not being accessible. You were the editors who orchestrated numerous events year after year that made comic books inaccessible, and you raised prices to the point where the average person couldn't buy them. I mean, a comic book today costs $5, and an SJS Direct ISIS series title like Bride of Dracula or Samurai Goddess, that costs $7.99. So I look at that and it's like 32 pages for $5, and then I buy 2 comics, that's $10, or I can buy one of these SJS Direct titles, and yes, it's a story, but you're getting a complete story for $7.99. Moreover, if you bought that in ebook form, it would only be $2.99. So comics and have a lower entertainment value per dollar than an indie publisher like myself. So what would the customer buy if they had to go out and buy? And when you compound other entertainment options that people have these days, like Spotify, Netflix, Hulu, and even other ebook publishers like those who publish, like myself, who publish on Kindle and Smashwords, customers have options that give them a higher entertainment value per dollar than comic books. Your average comic book costs $5, and they only give you maybe 10, 15 pages of story, and most of that story is exposition. When I publish a story that's cost $2.99 or $3.99, you get an entire story with a beginning, middle, and an end, and you see the action all the way through. But when you buy a Marvel comic or a DC comic these days, you get mostly exposition, you get entire scenes that are nothing but talking heads, and you get no action. So what is the incentive for a customer to go out here and buy a comic book? Why should I go out here and spend $5 or $4 on something that doesn't give me the same entertainment value per dollar as Netflix, which is $12 a month and gives me entire television series, or I can watch a CW series and in 9 months have an entire series, or I can go out here and even buy something from an indie writer like myself or an indie publisher that's giving me an entire story for a lower price. So comics have priced themselves right out of the market, and it's the approaches to business that have led to the industry, big two, pricing themselves right out of the market. The reason why people aren't buying comics is because the content in them is absolute crap these days. Over at DC, they're taking 2.5 years to try to get back to the DC universe, and here you see that this industry is in crisis. I would be speeding that up immediately. Talking about 2.5 years to finish a story, or 2 years to finish a story, I said in the previous video, was too long, because when it comes down to the customer, they have options and they're opting not to buy comics. Over at Marvel, they went crazy with this social justice campaign, and they poorly executed on diversity. Now, Marvel has had diversity for a number of years. They've had one of the most diverse catalogs of characters, but somewhat Tom Beverett or Axel Alonso decided they wanted to go on a social justice warrior thing, and they decided they were going to eliminate all the white male versions of their most popular characters and replace them with diversity hires. And as a result, guess what? Their sales plummeted. That, compounded with all the events that made comics difficult to read and that were difficult entry points, led to their overall decline and led to Marvel Comics publishing division being in the decline state that it's in and the slump that it's in. The reason why it's in a slump is because you're not giving the customer what they want. Again, customers are coming out of these Marvel Studios movies and they want to see Tony Stark as Iron Man. They want to see Steve Rogers as Captain America. They want to see Thor, Odin's son. They want to see Peter Parker as Spider-Man. They want to see Bruce Banner as the Hulk. They want to see Logan as Wolverine. This is what they've seen in the movies, and when they go to the comic book store, they're seeing completely different characters. And because they're seeing completely different characters, they have no reason to go out here and buy these comic books. When you're asking a customer to put money on the table, you have to give the customer what they want. And one of the big problems with the comic book industry is they want to give the customer what they want, and they insist that the customer take what they give them. Unfortunately, in the business world, it doesn't work that way. In the business world, you have to listen to the customer. You either listen to the customer or they vote with their wallet. And in case of both Marvel and DC, the customer has decided to vote with their wallet. And because they have decided to vote with their wallet, this is why the industry is in the crisis mode that it's in. When it comes down to business, business is 90% listening, 10% talking. And people at DC and Marvel are trying to shout at the customer and ram products down their throat instead of listening to the customer and trying to give them exactly what they want. Moreover, their customer service practices have alienated people more than anything, because when I look at someone like Dan Dido and Jim Lee who sit there and say we have to save the comic book industry, what really offends me about that is that these guys don't have any sort of integrity to apologize to the customer for doing things like ending the DC universe in 2011 and admitting that they made a mistake. They have no integrity to say, look, we made a mistake, we're sorry, and we're going to try to rectify this mistake. No, they come out disingenuous saying, we have to save the comic book industry. What incentive does the customer have to come in and save an industry when you are not approaching the customer in any sort of way that shows that you are conciliatory to the customer? The customer is the person who deserves the most respect, because when it comes down to this comic book industry, overall at the big two, they have been slapping the customer in the face for, I'd say, the last 15, 16 years. And they sit there with the hubris to say, we have to fix the industry, when if you treated this customer with just a little modicum of respect, you would have that customer coming back to you. What both editors at these companies don't understand is this: when it comes down to the customer in publishing, it's word of mouth that sells comics. And if you have strong word of mouth, you can sell more comics than your competitors. And when it comes down to Marvel and DC these days, you don't have that word of mouth. You've alienated a lot of customers by doing things like telling people that the universe that they grew up with for over 50, 60, 75 years is over and we're just going to give you new characters. And then you kill off their favorite characters and you expect them to just come back to you with open arms, with no apology and no sort of conciliatory gesture showing how much respect you have for these customers. This is why people don't want to buy comics anymore, because they don't feel like they're being respected at either company. They feel like they have been mistreated. These are characters that they grew up with. These are characters that they've had relationships with. These are characters many people grew up and identified with. And for them, they look at you taking their favorite characters, killing them off arbitrarily, or ending their universes, and that has made a lot of people angry. When it comes down to DC and Marvel, they have alienated their core customer base, and now their core customer base has decided they want to move on, and they have a reason to move on because neither one of these companies have treated them with respect. Moreover, so much time has passed after the disrespect at DC at 2011 and at Marvel in, I'd say, about 2015, that people may not be able to come back, because when it comes down to the customer, once a customer moves on, you have lost that customer. And when you've allowed so much time like they have at DC Comics to go on, it's almost impossible to get those customers to come back. It's been almost 7 years since the DC ended its classic universe in 2011, and so many people have moved on to other hobbies and even moved on in life overall. So for a lot of people, they've become completely indifferent to comics. They've gone from caring about comics to moving on, and they have mourned the loss of their favorite characters, and now they're willing to move forward. Over at Marvel, they have alienated people to the point where they're just saying they're willing to move on as well, because they look at that jumbled universe after Secret Wars, and again, there's enough time has passed that people have moved on. This is something that I saw with these reboots and all way back in the 1990s when Marvel first rebooted its universe. You let too much time pass and the customer moves on. And when customers move on, what happens is it's harder to get new customers, because you need to get 3 customers to replace the one who was a die-hard fan. Now, the die-hard fan may have spent $100, $200 at the comic shop and they're gone, but you're going to need 3 customers to get that one customer back, because what happens is you may get the first 2 customers may buy 1 or 2 comics, but the third one is the one who may stay with the brand. And it's hard to get customers when you have a distribution system that has fallen apart. And then what really makes Dan Dido disingenuous when he was talking about, oh, we want to do something about the distribution system. People have been complaining about Diamond for years. I remember when Bob Layton in 2012, when he was running Future Comics, talked about just Diamond and the distribution of comics. And there should have been a plan by both Disney, Marvel, Warner Brothers, and Disney to do something about distribution, because if people can't find comics anyplace outside of a comic book store, then they have no incentive to buy them. But the comic book industry didn't want to go out here and go outside of the comic book shops, because they didn't want to change their content. Because in order to distribute a comic book in a grocery store, a drugstore, a place like Walmart or Target, the content is going to have to change to be more PG or PG-13. And a lot of the gore and graphic violence that are featured in comics today, you're not going to be able to run that in comics in places where there are families and children. Nor are you going to be able to run comics with a whole host of exposition in a place with families and children. And a lot of creators didn't want to go out here and change their content and make it family friendly, so they decided they were going to be in the comic shops. Unfortunately, the industry can't grow in comic shops because when it comes down to the comic shop, it only appeals to a small audience, it only appeals to certain customers, and it doesn't really appeal to the family audience. And the time to start thinking about distribution was way back in the 1990s after the industry collapsed the first time, but now they want to think about it now, but it may be too late. Because when I look at the big picture for this comic book industry, we have people talking about saving it, but the big problem is you have the same people who made the mess talking about saving the industry when you really need someone who has been outside of the industry, someone with an objective perspective and an objective view of things to take a look at this industry. And that's the person who's going to have the vision to take this industry into a new direction for the 21st century. As I see it right now, all the people who are in charge right now, they need to be fired because they have proven over the last 15, 20 years they are not capable of running both Marvel Comics and DC Comics, nor do they have a comprehensive plan to fix the dysfunction that goes on at both companies. They don't have an editorial structure set up to establish a standard at both companies, nor do they have a long-term plan for trying to reach new customers in and rebuild the trust in the comic book industry. That's the big thing that is really hampering the growth of the comic book industry, as I see it, at both Marvel and DC. When it comes down to both companies, many readers are on the sidelines and they want to see somebody come in who isn't Dan Dido, somebody who isn't Jim Lee, somebody who isn't Bob Harris, somebody who isn't Diane Nelson, someone who isn't Axel Alonso, someone who isn't Tom Beverett. They want to see someone come in who is going to be someone who can build a relationship with them, someone who will listen to them, and someone they believe they can trust to maintain the integrity of these characters, maintain the integrity of the catalog, and present and establish a standard for quality publications at both companies. That's what many comic fans want to see happen at Marvel and DC. That's the person who they want to see. They want to see an outside person come in. And I believe if they saw an outside person come in with that vision and somebody who was willing to try to be an ambassador of goodwill, someone who was trying to facilitate a trust with the community, with the comic fans, and someone who's trying to build a relationship with comic fans, that person would be the person to help try to fix this comic book industry. Because as I see it right now with the people in charge, yes, we are going to have a collapse. And the reason why we're going to have a collapse is because comic fans just don't trust the people in charge to give them quality comics. And they want to see someone new come to leadership at Marvel and DC. And if they saw that new person come in, and that person laying down a hard foundation with standards, a hard foundation with a vision, a hard foundation with a direction, and someone who would provide guidance and support to their editorial teams and creative teams, then people would have a reason and an incentive to go out here and buy comics on the regular. If you'd like to try some of my SJS Direct Universe titles, such as the ISIS series, the East Team series, and books like The Temptation of John Haynes, you may do so by going to Amazon.com and clicking the link in the description box. And if you want to help me make more videos and pay for the covers for the books in my SJS Direct 2017 catalog, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.